Imagine waking to a cracking silence so sharp it feels like the air itself might shatter, then watching your own breath drift above you in pale ribbons, inside what should be the warmest place you know. No glass shields the window holes. No iron stove hums in a corner. There is only a threadbare roof of straw and reeds, a blackened fire pit, and the icy patience of midwinter Europe. This is a peasant dawn in the 1300s, and winter isn't a season, it's a hunter circling the hut. Yet, night after night, these villagers outsmarted, not outmuscled the cold, with an ingenuity we'd call life hacks today. Smoke so thick it doubled as pesticide, goats pressed into duty as space heaters, even clothing left unwashed so grease and dirt could harden into a windproof crust. Before you settle in, take a second to like and subscribe, only if this kind of storytelling speaks to you. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these whispers travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft hum, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. First, step inside their house, if we dare call it one. Picture a skeleton of willow rods bent and woven like a gigantic basket, then slathered with a paste equal parts clay, straw, and cow dung. That wattle and daub skin dries to the colour of old bone, crumbles at a careless kick, yet stops just enough wind to earn the name wall. Above, bundles of thatch overlap like scales on a sagging beast home to spiders, owls, and the occasional rat that loses its grip and drops into the grain bin with a squeal. Each winter storm combs icy fingers through the straw, shaking loose chaff and snowflakes that flutter onto sleeping faces below. The only flaw is the earth itself. Tramped flat, trodden damp, always hungry to reclaim spilled broth or children's bare toes. When a northerly gust barges through the door curtain, it shoots across the room unchecked, turning the hut into a living wind tunnel that whistles around ears and stings every gap in a threadbare tunic. The family fights back with handfuls of soggy moss wedged into cracks. A fresh smear of dung here, a patched bundle of reeds there. But each fix is a bandage on a wound that never heals. On the coldest nights, the babies migrate inward. Adults pile around them, and those unlucky enough to sleep against the wall wake with lashes crusted white. Still, the chill slicing through loose thatch and crooked doorway is only half the threat. Because the real danger doesn't blow in from outside, it seeps up from below. The very ground that fed a peasant's cabbages by day became an assassin by night. Once frost crept deeper than a man's wrist, the packed earth floor hardened into a single slab of ice-soaked clay. Lie on it long enough, and it sucked warmth the way a leech drinks blood. So families tried to lift themselves a finger-width higher than death. First came the rushes. All autumn, the children waded through riverbanks, cutting armloads of reeds, then scattered them ankle-deep across the hut. Fresh, they smelled of green water. By February, they reeked of rot and pig droppings, each layer hiding the last like pages of a filthy book. On top of that went straw. Carpeting, crushed daily under boots until a brittle rind formed. When someone shifted in sleep, you'd hear it crack, crunch like stepping on thin lake ice. The sound was a comfort. It meant you were still above the dirt. If you were lucky, there was a straw tick, a sack of coarse linen stuffed so tight it inflated like a loaf. At dusk, the youngest would flip it and beat away mould, fleas leaping off in dusty arcs. But the tick cooled faster than it warmed. A sweating body at midnight became a shivering body by 2. Couples spooned not for romance, but to keep kidneys from chilling. Elders swore you could wake paralysed from the waist down, skin numb, breath fogging in little desperate puff-searly hypothermia delivered from below rather than above. Some resigned themselves to bare earth. They banked their backs against it, as soldiers lean on shields, trusting layers of wool and grease-stiff tunics to hold the line. Yet even wool becomes treacherous once damp. Moisture wicked from the ground rose through cloth, found skin, and stole heat molecule by molecule. In bad winters, gravediggers noticed the pattern. Blue tinge on the spine, frost burns on shoulder blade signatures of the murderous floor. Occasionally, a desperate soul tried earth fires, hollowing a pit beneath the bedding, packing it with embered charcoal, sealing it with a flat stone. Warmth radiated for hours sunless, the stone cracked. More than one cottage went up in a whoosh of sparks, forcing the family to choose between freezing outdoors or roasting within. So the struggle shifted. If the cold advanced from underfoot, then heat had to be summoned from the centre of the room and made to linger until dawn. The answer flickered in the hearth's glow. Tiny yet defiant, and the peasants would guard that glow with every breath they had. At the very heart of every hovel beat a shallow crater of glowing wood, a hearth, so modest it could be scraped out with a spoon, yet powerful enough to decide who saw spring. No chimney pierced the roof. The smoke had to find its own escape, curling upward through the thatch like a grey serpent, then oozing back down to fill the room in a blue haze. Eyes stung, lungs rasped, but fleas, lice, and even mice hated the fumes more than people did. And so the peasants inhaled their medicine without complaint. Mothers blew smoke into blanket folds. Fathers waved it beneath a straw tick, creating pockets of pest-free calm that lasted an hour if they were lucky. Keeping that flame alive was a ritual bordering on religion. At dusk, the day's last sticks were arranged like ribs over a barely breathing coal bed. Someone, often the least important sleeper, was tasked with banking the fire, scooping ash over the ember pile until it smothered bright flames but left a core of heat glowing secret red. Do it right, and the coals would smoulder until dawn, ready to roar back with a single puff and a twig. Do it wrong, and the family would wake to a corpse-cold pit, faces already numb, frost creeping across the rushes like spilled milk. Stories spread of cottages where embers died, and before the rooster crowed, so did the youngest child. Therefore, a rota formed, quiet but ironclad. The grandmother, half-deaf yet light-sleeping, took first watch, prodding the heap with a hazel stick whenever the glow dimmed. After midnight, a teen bones young enough to endure the chill curled beside the pit, eyelids painted orange by its pulse. Even toddlers learned to recognize the danger. If the room fell dark, they toddled over and poked the ash, tiny guardians of the tribe's heartbeat. Fuel was precious. Whole villages rationed woodland rights. So kindling might be hedgerow trimmings, broken tool handles, even dried cowpats. The smell of burning dung clung to hair and wool, but no one cared. Heat was heat. Occasionally, sparks leapt onto the reed roof. A quick, thinking watcher slapped them out with a damp rag, knowing that a single missed ember could trade freezing for firestorm. Yet, for all its magic, the hearth was a candle in a cavern blazing at the core, useless at the edges. The farther you lay from that pit, the colder the night pressed in, and so, faced with walls that refused to hold warmth, the peasants turned to a living solution, one that breathed, bleated, and snored right beside them. When the hearth could do no more than toast faces and fingertips, the household deployed its secret weapon, body slots of them. Think of a straw-strewn corner transformed into a three-dimensional casserole, each layer another source of warmth in the peasant recipe for survival. Children were slid in first, 2 or 3 to a blanket, limbs tangled like roots. Next came grandparents, brittle but invaluable. Elders leaked heat slowly, so they were packed tight against the little ones. Father and mother pressed along the outer edge, backs presented to the draft, muscle and wool taking the brunt. Over everything sagged, a patchwork hide, stitched from mended cloaks, burlap feed sacks, and any scrap that hadn't already been burned for kindling human lasagna, served nightly until April. But humans alone couldn't outgun a February gale. Enter the livestock. Goats were favourites, small enough to wedge between sleepers, furred like portable hearth rugs, and prone to chewing holes in clothing rather than people. A good nanny goat radiated the warmth of a small stove. Better yet, she would bleat at the faintest creak of a door hinge, doubling as an alarm system. Pigs joined if the family was wealthier, desperate. A sow's belly is a swaying furnace, her breath a foghorn of ammonia, but she lay so hot that frost retreated a foot wherever she sprawled. Chickens fluttered onto rafters at dusk, then lost footing as temperatures plunged. One by one they dropped like feathered embers onto the sleeper pile, burrowing beneath armpits and neck folds until only combs peeked out. Hierarchy mattered. Infants and arthritic knees nestled where heat pooled deepest. The strongest, usually father, sometimes a teenage son, built like green, timber took the perimeter. If a wolf or thief pried open the door, They'd hit a wall of flesh before they reached the helpless core. Between grunts, snores, and goat chews, night sounded like a barn choirette. The collective thermostat inched upward, breath by steamy breath. Of course, this tactic birthed new miseries. Fleas hopped species without breaking stride, coughs ricocheted from throat to throat, and morning meant scraping dung pellets from blankets. Still, everyone woke with ears intact and toes tingling instead of blackened, and that counted as victory. Even wrapped in this breathing quilt, the family could feel ghostly fingers of cold slide in from somewhere hairline cracks, knot holes, seams where daub had crumbled. Plug those leaks, and the night might finally surrender. By lamplighter what passed for it, a reed wick sputtering in tallow the family launched its nightly hunt for holes. A single fingertip pressed to a wall could read the language of winter. If the skin prickled, a gap was speaking. First came the soft fillers. Moss, peeled from the shady side of trees, was kneaded into fuzzy sausages and rammed into every seam where wattle met daub. It swelled when damp, sealing tighter, and exhaled a piney scent that almost disguised the livestock perfume. Where moss ran short, rags took over. Unravelling tunic cuffs, frayed cradle swaddles, even the strip of linen once used as last year's bandage. Nothing was wasted. Children worked the smaller fissures with goose feathers, tamping in tufts of shed goat hair until the crack disappeared beneath a furry moustache. Over larger wounds, they smeared a fresh skim of mud mixed with chopped straw and dung the medieval equivalent of spray foam. Each autumn, before the first frosts, Father would ladle buckets of that steaming slurry against the outer walls. When it dried, the hovel wore a crust like earthen armour, brown on brown, smelling faintly of pasture and promise. The roof demanded its own bribery. Thatch aged like bread left in the sun. It dried, cracked, invited everything with claws or wings. So, on moonless nights, the men crept to the Lord's fallow fields, cut away squares of turf, and heaved them aloft to patch bare spots. A fresh plug held heat better than gold if you ignored the penalty for poaching sod. Inside, the air itself needed taming. The hearth smoke, once thick enough to stun fleas, now abandoned its post when drafts reversed, sucking frigid air straight down the chimneyless throat. To survive, the sudden gasp, sleepers tied scraps of cloth across their mouths and noses. These makeshift masks did double duty, captured warm exhalations and forced slow, shallow breathing, a trick learned from shepherds on night watch. Less air in, less heat lost. Still, every fixer-upper session revealed new betrayals. A knot that shrank, a beam that warped, the invisible sieve of woven hurdle panels. They patched, stuffed, plastered, and prayed, yet deep down knew the structure could turn traitor again before dawn. That's why all the mud walls and moss sausages in Christendom were only half the war. Of course, none of this mattered if you dressed wrong. By the time the daub was patched, and the goat had settled into her spot on the family quilt, it was time for the last defence, the wardrobe. Not fashion in the courtly sense, this was survival cloth, arranged like armour plates against a siege of ice. First came linen, the only fabric that could kiss bare skin without raising welts. A shirt long enough to brush the knees trapped a thin film of air, nature's cheapest insulation. Over that went woolets of wool, a threadbare cotehardie, then a sleeveless surcoat, sometimes a second if the larder of cast-offs ran deep. Each layer captured another pocket of warmth, and each was left gloriously, purposefully, filthy. Months of sweat, tallow smoke and kitchen grease wove themselves into the fibres, forming a grimy, wind-proof varnish that a January gale could only gnaw at. The peasant's secret weapon was suet. Before first snowfall, they rendered beef fat, let it congeal, and rubbed the waxy paste into elbows, shoulders, and anywhere rain found seams. It reeked like a butcher's stall, but turned cloth into water-shedding hide. Only thieves smelled fresher. Feet were high-stakes extremities. Rag strips often cut from garments too small, for even the youngest child were wound around toes until they resembled bulbous roots. These bandaged stumps slid into wooden clogs, cheap blocks of alder that lifted flesh above puddles and dung alike. The wood never grew warm, yet it never let frostbite bite either. Above the brows perched the crown jewel, a wool cap sometimes felted so thick it could stand alone. Lose that hat, and you bled heat like an upended flagon. Mothers swore they could hear warmth whistling from uncovered ears. Mittens, when available, were laced to wrists with twine lows won in the dark, and you might lose fingers by dawn. Cleanliness, oddly, was the enemy. Washing a tunic in midwinter meant draping it over the hearth and praying it dried before nightfall. Half-dry fabric iced solid against skin, drawing out body heat faster than nakedness. So grime stayed, a living, crack-filling glaze that smelled of smoke and sour milk, but sealed in life itself. When every scarf was tucked and every rope belt cinched, the family resembled lumpy shadows more than humans. Yet if a gust rattled the door, they felt it stall against wool, grease, and stubborn, layering the difference between dawn laughs and midnight screams. Warm on the outside? Good. Now they had to ignite a furnace within. And that called for a very special supper. The evening stew was less cuisine than chemistry. A slow-boiled plot to trick the body into becoming its own bonfire. Into the iron pot went turnips wizened like old knuckles, onions so sharp they made the smoke cry, and knobbly carrots rescued from under frost-crusted soil. A fist of dried peas followed. Then the magic ballast fat. Bacon rinds, dollops of lard, even the skimmed eye that floated atop yesterday's broth was slid back in. "Feed the stew, feed the blood," the grandmother muttered, stirring with a stick that had seasoned more winters than she had teeth. Timing mattered. They ate late, moments before bedding down, so the furnace of digestion would peak during the coldest hours. The children called it belly fire, the way a bowl of greasy porridge could spread warmth down their limbs faster than any cloak. Each swallow laid another ember inside, and soon their cheeks glowed under soot streaks. But firewood was precious, and a pot left hanging all evening was fuel squandered. The workaround was the hay box cooker, a gap in the corner wall, stuffed with dry hay and lined with ragged linen. At dusk, the pot, lid tied tight with a strip of leather, was buried in the fragrant nest. The hay trapped the heat like a dragon hoarding gold, simmering the stew without a single extra log. By mealtime, broth and vegetables had formed a thick, glistening slurry that slid impossibly slow from spoon to mouth exactly, the pace needed for maximum warming, while bowls were licked clean. Smooth river stones heated in the hearth took their turn in the dance. Once they blushed red, the stones were fished out with tongs, rolled in damp cloth, and tucked beneath straw mattresses. They hissed softly, releasing loyal heat for hours. Children fought for the heartstone, the warmest of the batch, bargaining chores for the right to clutch it against their ribs. The goat, already fed, lounged nearby like a living radiator. Her slow cud-chewing matched the rhythm of the family's settling stomachs. Around her, the humans arranged themselves in layers wool, blankets, then bodies each person, a link in a chain of retained calories. Yet rituals finished never meant danger finished. A single spark left untended, a sudden downdraft, or a prowling wolf could still undo all that inside heat. The stew's warmth would fade, the stones would cool, and bellies would growl anew. Someone had to keep vigilance, eyes half open, ears tuned to the mutter of embers and the groan of rafters. In huts no wider than a wagon and no taller than a standing ox, the night was broken into watches like a monk's cloister only here. The litany was crackle, cough and creak. Father would take the first stint until his eyelids dragged. Then a sharp nudge sent a child to the hearth. Age 7 was old enough to wield a poker, old enough to know the price of forgetting. The rule was simple. Never let the glow die to black. A smart boy banked fresh coals beneath ash, shaping a shallow crater so the embers breathed but didn't blaze. A smarter one listened for drafts that could steal their heat. When the thatch sighed, he stuffed a wad of moss into the gap. When frost rhymed the nailheads, he draped a spare rag over the beam. Quiet triumphs yet, each carried all the gravity of battle honours, because a single misstep invited an enemy no sword could stop. Grandmother's watch came deepest in the night. Bent spine, clouded eyes, but fingers deft as any smith's. She could sense failing coals without rising, feeling their ebb through the soles of her feet. A twist of straw, a puff of breath, and the red returned, pulsing like a slow heart. Around her the family slept in ragged tears, steam rising from their mouths and from the goat's flanks in lazy ribbons. She did not wake them when the snow slid from the roof with the thunder of muffled drums, and Lee smiled, knowing the night's weight had lessened. Stories of failure were whispered as warnings. A neighbour whose ember winked out and let the rafters freeze, crack, and fall like spears. A cousin who woke to find his toes stone, grey, bitten beyond feeling. A whole household discovered stiff as corn dollies after wind punched a new door through rotten daub. Every child in the hamlet could recite these tales. They were the catechism that kept small hands diligent at impossible hours. Yet dread alone wasn't the fuel that carried them. There was a strange, stubborn pride in beating back darkness, with nothing but a glowing seed of wood. Each successful watch was a quiet proclamation. We are still here. When the rooster finally crowed and the first blue seam cut the horizon, the watcher shook the sleepers one by one. Numb fingers thawed. Roofs still stood, and the hearth, though low, remained a live ember ready to birth another day. Because as brutal as the cold proved, every sunrise taught the same lesson. If mud walls, thin wool, and a child's vigilance could outlast the longest night, then perhaps winter itself could be fooled again tomorrow. Dawn leaks through the thatch like thin milk, and the hamlet exhales. Chickens scuttle out. Pigs nose crusted snow, and smoke rises from every roofer constellation of victories stitched across the frost-white valley. Step inside any hut now, and you'll witness the four pillars that let yesterday roll forward into today. First, improvise the shelter. Those mud and dung walls were never pretty, but every autumn smear, every fistful of moss turned a wind tunnel into a breathing lung. The peasants taught us that good enough insulation is sometimes the difference between cold and coffin. Second, share the heat. Human lasagna, goat radiators, straw mattresses over living embers comfort was collective. The loner froze, the cluster thrived. Modern sleeping bag ratings and emergency bivouacs echo this truth. Bodies want company when the mercury dives. Third, master the flame. A hearth no bigger than a dog's bed powered the entire survival economy. Banking coals, staggering watches, and haybox cookers formed a technology of patience more sophisticated than any iron latch or jewelled brooch. Fourth, fuel the body. Stews thick as wet clay, lard slick porridges, and rye bricks weren't indulgence. They were portable furnaces. Caloric science written in grease stains long before textbooks caught up. Add them together, and you get a blueprint that still threads through our lives. Insulated walls, their daub, central heating, their hearth, sleeping bag mummy shape, their human sandwich. Even the humble thermos borrows from the haybox idea. Capture heat, lock it in, spend it later. So the next time you mutter about a draft sneaking under the apartment door, picture a 7-year-old with a poker in hand, half asleep but wholly responsible for keeping 4 generations alive. Remember the grandmother who judged fire by foot feel, the father who timed stew like a clock, and the goat that paid her rent in midnight warmth. Winter is still out there, just beyond the double-glazed glass, waiting for any ember that slips to ash. But thanks to the dirt-caked, smoke-smeared ingenuity of medieval peasants, most of us greet the cold with a thermostat click instead of a prayer. Their stubborn will became our quiet convenience. And if someday the power fails and the night grows teeth again, their lessons remain ready-tucked in history like coals beneath ash-glowing, patient and perfectly willing to teach us all over again. So here we sit centrally heated, fleece-wrapped, bathed in electric light-feeling worlds, away from that mud-walled crucible. Yet the distance is thinner than the double glazing we lean against. A power cut, an empty oil tank, a stalled supply chain, and suddenly the ancient quiz returns. Can you keep one ember alive until dawn? Strip away the thermostats, and we are still the same fragile furnaces the peasants were. Our breath still fogs in cold air. Our fingers still lose blood first. Our stomachs still burn calories into heat. Biology hasn't updated in the centuries since wattle met daub. What changed was the buffer layers of technology insulating us from the quiz. Forget that, and progress looks suspiciously like complacency. Look again at their 4 pillars, and you'll see a survival algorithm waiting for reuse. 1. Shelter. Anything that blocks wind is a wall. Cardboard, tarp, snow peasants, judged material by performance, not aesthetics. 2. Share. 1 warm body is a candle, 4 are a bonfire. Social warmth is physics wearing a human face. 3. Fire. Whether it's hardwood, propane, or lithium ion, treat your heat source like a living thing. Feed it, guard it. Never assume it will babysit itself. 4. Fuel. Calories are just batteries you swallow. Stock them as faithfully as you do phone chargers. Most of us will never need to stack straw over glowing coals or sleep nose to tail with a goat. But knowing that you could is its own comfort. It rewires fear into competence. It is the quiet, flinty confidence that helped an illiterate ploughman stare down a blizzard and say, "Not tonight." History rarely hands out perfect metaphors, yet this one feels deliberate. Life is banking embers. Ideas, friendships, skills, even kindness. They're all tiny coals we tuck under ash for some future hour of need. Neglect them and they gutter out. Tend them and they're waiting, patient, whenever the long dark shows up at the door again. So the next time winter taps the window panes, pause before you twist the thermostat. Feel the room for drafts. Listen to the radiator like a hearth. Maybe ladle yourself a stew that clings to the spoon, and as steam curls up in familiar, ghost grey ribbons. Spare a nod for the mud-smudged ancestors who rehearsed that ritual under rafters that dripped, with wolves howling beyond torch reach. They kept the ember alive. Now it's ours to guard through storm, outage, or the icy centuries still to come. Picture a February night when the power blinks out and the apartment hum falls silent. The LED clocks die, radiators cool, and every modern promise evaporates into a hush thick enough to hear your own heartbeat. In that pause, the distance to the Middle Ages shrinks to a single shiver. That is the moment to rehearse what you've just learned. Step 1. Shelter. Drag bookshelves against the drafty window. Tack a blanket over the doorframe. Lay a rugany rug on the tiles to muzzle the cold that prowls from below. Wattle and daub in spirit if not in substance. Step 2. Share. Call the roommate, wake the kids, invite the neighbour whose lights also vanished. Pile mattresses together. Layer bodies like that human lasagna our ancestors perfected. Embarrassment is temporary, hypothermia is permanent. Step 3. Fire. Maybe you've a candle, a camping stove, or nothing but a tin of sterno. Guard it like a newborn. Feed it sparingly. Cup it from drafts. And if safe, place a clay pot above it to trap and radiate warmth. A 20th century micro-half. Step 4. Fuel. Raid the pantry for dense calories. Peanut butter, rice, canned beans, cooking oil. Eat small, hot portions. Drink warm water, even if you don't feel thirsty. Dehydration chills faster than snowmelt. None of this is romantic. It smells of smoke, feels of cramped limbs, sounds like the soft whimper of someone colder than they've ever been. Yet, inside that discomfort, a strange pride blooms, the same pride that glowed behind medieval eyes when dawn pried open another day they'd refused to surrender. So practice while the lights are still on. Turn down the thermostat for a weekend. Cook a stew that lingers overnight in its own heat. Learn the feel of wool that never quite dries, the discipline of breathing shallow through a scarf to warm every inhale. These drills etch muscle memory deeper than any YouTube tutorial you might lose when the router dies. Because history's quiz has never been fully retired. It just waits off stage, patient as winter itself. A solar flare, a ruptured pipeline, or a single storm aimed wrong, and the curtain will snap open again. When it does, some will panic, some will pray, and some aware of goats as radiators, straw over embers, and the quiet arithmetic of shared body heat will simply get to work. Which group you belong to is being decided right now, ember by ember, choice by choice. Are you tending your future coals, or letting them drift to ash? There's one last lesson smouldering in the ashes of those medieval hearths, and it has nothing to do with moss-packed walls or goat breath. It's about memory. An ember is only half alive until a hand remembers to stir it, and knowledge is only potential until a tongue bothers to pass it on. For peasants, that transfer was oral grandmother to child, neighbour to neighbour, because ink was rarer than sunlight in December. A single forgotten trick could cost an entire hamlet its next winter. Fast forward to us, scrolling through tips cached on devices that die the instant the battery icon blinks red. Our survival playbook lives on screens as fragile as rice paper in the rain. How many of your friends could start a fire without a lighter? Patch a wall with mud? Turn oats and grease into a body-warming meal? Skills unpracticed slip away like warmth through a cracked door. So pick one trick, just one, and make it muscle memory. Maybe it's banking, a charcoal bed under ash, or sewing a wool layer so tight it traps body vapor. Practice until your hands know the motions blindfolded, because in the dark, you may have no choice. Then teach it at a backyard barbecue, a scout meeting, a bored Sunday afternoon with the kids. Make the knowledge redundant, the way peasants insisted 2 people, not 1, knew where every ember hid. Imagine a decade from now. The grid hiccups for a week, and apartments across your city dip toward freezing. The elevator's dead, the thermostat's a silent brick. Down the stairwell drifts the smell of actual wood smoke yours. Neighbours knock, wide-eyed, clutching phones they can't charge. You hand them mugs of something hot. Show them how to curtain a hallway with a bedsheet. How to share floor space without losing dignity or toes. In that moment you become the village elder, the living archive. The ember travelled centuries to land in your palms. You passed it on before it cooled. Will that scenario ever unfold? Maybe. Maybe not. But winter, literal or metaphorical, always circles back, prowling for the unprepared. Each habit you rehearse is a door slammed in its face, each skill a fresh log on the communal fire. Listen closely, do you hear it? That faint crackle beyond the comfortable hum of your life could be nothing. But it could be the sound of the next long night approaching, looking for houses where every ember has already gone cold. Take a step back from the flicker of imagined candlelight and the goat-scented press of bodies. What have those frost-bitten centuries really handed us? 4 ironclad principles, hammered out on nights so cold that ink froze in its pots. First, shelter is elastic. Peasants stretch walls with dung and moss. You stretch curtains, furniture, cardboard, anything that slows the wind. A barrier, however humble, buys degrees that add up to dawn. Second, warmth is communal. They stacked infants between elders, pigs beside pilgrims, dignity beneath survival. Today, that could be roommates on the living room floor, neighbours rotating under the only battery lamp. Heat shared is heat multiplied. Third, fire is stewardship. A medieval hearth was never just a blaze. It was a bank account whose currency was embers. They deposited ash at night, withdrew coals at dawn, and taught every child the passcode of breath, tinder, patience. Whether your flame is a storm lantern or a trickle from a portable charger, treat it as capital, not decoration. Fourth, the body is a furnace that demands fuel. Thick stews, oily porridges, rice so dense it doubled, as a doorstop calories that smouldered for hours. Our pantries gleam with nut butters, pasta, beans, chocolate. Eat like the night is long, because it might be. Threaded through each principle is a 5th, quieter gift. Stubborn creativity. Mud became mortar, smoke became insecticide. A sleeping goat became central heating. Every constraint was an invitation to invent an invitation still open. And look at the heirs of those inventions. Chimneys replaced smoke holes. Fiberglass supplanted moss. Thermostats whisper commands to boilers miles away. Yet every marvel traces back to someone in a thatched hut, rubbing cracked hands together and thinking, there must be a better way to keep my children alive. The lineage is unbroken. So the next time a blizzard strafes the power lines, or an outage plunges your block into pre-industrial silence, pause before panic fills the dark. Feel for the pulse of memory beating just beneath the skin of the present. Recall walls that breathe through straw, beds that steamed with goat breath, and embers nursed like newborns. Then axe stack, share, shield, eat, tend. Become, for one determined night, the distant relative of those peasants who refused to freeze. Because winter is less a season than a question. They answered it with mud, smoke, and relentless will. Your tools are sleeker, your roof tighter, your larder richer. Picture the modern thermostat plastic, beige, unremarkable mounted like a tiny sovereign on your wall. Tap it, and the boiler obeys. Swipe an app and a silicon brain somewhere far away nudges flames you never see. Comfort has become invisible, abstract, almost mythic. You don't smell the smoke, you don't cradle the ember. Most days that feels like progress. Then the grid hiccups, or fuel prices spike, or a hurricane rips wires from poles. And for one shivering heartbeat you're standing beside every peasant who ever prayed his thatch wouldn't catch frost. What bridges that gap? Not technology alone, but mindset. A readiness to improvise with whatever the day offers. Medieval villagers mastered that art because they had no alternative. We, surrounded by conveniences, have to choose it on purpose. So let's translate their playbook into a 21st century toolkit. No goats required, unless you want them. 1. Elastic shelter. Keep a roll of painter's plastic, a staple gun, and duct tape in a drawer. Instant interior tent rooms trap body heat exactly like peat packed annexes once did. 2. Communal warmth. Start a phone, tree family, floor mates, neighbours. Agree now that during an outage you'll pull sleeping bags and calories in the warmest apartment. A pact before crisis replaces negotiations after teeth start chattering. 3. Fire stewardship. Buy a pack of long-burn charcoal and a lidded metal bucket. That, plus a 2 box of Strike Anywhere matches, is modern ember banking. Store it like medicine. 4. Caloric fuel. Rotate shelf. Stable, high-fat foods, peanut butter, ghee, canned chili. Think portable porridge for the body furnace. 5. Creative constraint. Make it a game. One weekend, flip the breaker, light only candles, cook on a camp stove, and sleep in a blanket fort. Children call it adventure. Adults call it rehearsal. Do these steps feel quaint? So did dung walls once, until they kept babies alive. The point isn't to live every night as if Vikings are raiding the grid. It's to ensure that, if comfort evaporates, capability condenses in its place. Now close your eyes and picture a storm front lumbering over the horizon. Streetlights wink out. The room exhales cold. In that hush, will you reach for the thermostator, for the memory you practiced in the soft safety of ordinary time? The answer is still yours to script, and the wind outside is starting to ask for it. A week after the wind's first inquiry, the storm arrives for an answer. Fat snowflakes batter the windows like mailed fists, and the street outside blurs into a single white wall. Power flickers once. Twice then, the thermostat's tiny sovereign abdicates with a quiet click. Silence expands, colder than the draft that now prowls the hallway. You move without thinking, because you practiced. Plastic sheeting comes out of its roll with a sound like distant applause. Staples thunk into door frames, shrinking the livable universe to one bedroom. Duct tape seals the vents in shiny silver X's. Medieval moss upgraded by 3M. Next, the phone tree. Techs hop cell towers while they still can. Room is prepped. Bring bags, snacks, candles. Within 20 minutes, boots clomp up the stairwell. 2 neighbours. One anxious grad student with a cat carrier, and Mrs. Delgado from 4B hauling a Dutch oven that smells of cinnamon and beans. Communal warmth achieved, goats optional. Someone asks about light. You flip open the metal bucket, fish out a charcoal briquette, and nestle it in a tiny fold-up stove on a ceramic Tilemba banking meets urban fire code. The cat curls so close you worry its whiskers will scorch. Mrs. Delgado laughs softly. Living lasagna, just like my abuela's village. Outside, the transformer pops green flare, distant but menacing. Darkness presses harder against the taped windows. Breath becomes visible. Involuntarily, everyone exhales at once, a chorus of fog. You ladle Dutch oven stew into mugs to prime the internal furnaces. Calories travel down throats, radiate from bellies, leak into the shared air. Hours pass in card games, whispered stories, and periodic blanket shuffling. The briquette glows, then wanes. You flip it, dust a pinch of sugar on the coal to spike the burn, a trick lifted straight from 14th century charcoalers. The ember revives, a small red planet with its own sunrise. yet cold is patient. It infiltrates floorboards, seeps through mattress coils, waits for vigilance to droop. At 2:17 a.m., the grad student nods off during ember duty. The glow dims to sullen ash. You see it first. A memory ignites. Frostbitten families found frozen for lack of a single spark. Quietly, you nudge the student awake and reach for the match tin. One strike left. Sulphur scratches. Hesitates. Will it catch? Or will this roomful of modern peasants learn tonight the final, brutal lesson their ancestors paid in flesh? The match head flares. The sulphur halo blooms, blister white against the dark, then settles into a steady flame no wider than a thumbnail. Everyone exhales another ghostly plume and you shelter the match with cupped hands, the way a medieval fire watcher would have shielded a single glowing coal. No one speaks. The room is a cathedral for this fragile saint of heat. You tip the flame to a twist of paper, then to a stub of beeswax candle scavenged from the last birthday party. Wax softens, wicks hiss, light expands. The grad student mouths, sorry. You shrug. Apology wastes body heat. Instead, you split the group into two crews, echoing the old peasant rota. One to sleep, one to tend the ember. Miss Delgado volunteers first watch, trussing her cardigan around the Dutch oven to trap rising warmth like a lid on a pot. Fuel is the next problem. The charcoal bucket holds only 3 briquettes. Sunrise is 5 hours away. You think of medieval dung Kakislo, smoky, long, burning, and begin inventorying modern equivalents. Cardboard? Too fast. Cotton shirts? Needed for insulation. Then you spot the paperback novels brought for entertainment. Pulp paper, dense, glue, rich, a cousin to Pete if packed tight. The authors might forgive the sacrifice, you decide, if it keeps their readers alive. Pages are rolled, bound with twine, dipped quickly in leftover candle drippings, a DIY tallow log, straight from a 14th century breviary of household tricks. While the new fuel cures, blankets are rearranged into the human lasagna pattern. Cat and candles in the centre, elders next, you and the grad student forming the outer crust. Heat gradients form almost instantly. Physics and folklore shake hands beneath the quilts. Someone chuckles that the room now smells like beeswax and library basement. The scent is oddly comforting, proof that matter is still willing to trade itself for warmth. Outside, the storm mutates. Wind stops howling and begins to creak, prying at the very frame of the building. Ancient thatch once groaned like this before surrendering to wet snow. Drywall may prove no tougher. A dull crack echoes through the stairwell, perhaps just a drifting branch, perhaps something closer, heavier. Conversation stills. Even the cat lifts its head, ears swiveling toward the sound. You set the improvised tallow log atop the glowing coal, watch its edges smoulder to orange, then glance at the door. The corridor beyond the apartment door is a draft tunnel, colder by 10 degrees and pitch black, but for the timid glow leaking from your jam. You crack the door anyway, just as a medieval peasant might have lifted a thatch flap to see if the barn still stood. Frost fog tumbles in, curling around your ankles like a living thing. "Leave it," whispers the grad student, clutching the cat. Yet another thump reverberates closer, followed by a faint metallic clatter. Not a branch, something man-made. Mrs. Delgado tightens her cardigan. Could be the radiator stack. If it bursts, we all get ice on the stairs. She's right. A single frozen pipe can turn escape routes into glass slides, can lock firefighters out and trap heat-hungry tenants in. The stakes are eerily familiar when a thatched roof collapsed under snow in 1384, records note. The family inside had no path to the communal hearth and froze within arm's reach of neighbours. You grab the flashlight, the LED equivalent of a pine-pitch torch, and step into the hallway. The door clicks shut behind you, sealing everyone else inside the improvised longhouse. Your breath plumes. The air tastes metallic, battery, cold. Floorboards creak with every step, echoing like church pews in the emptiness. Halfway to the stairwell, you find the culprit. A loose maintenance hatch vibrating against its frame, each gust slamming it like a gong. One screw dangles, stripped. You could jam it with a folded takeaway menu, But memory surfaces a note from an HVAC forum about metal panels acting as heat sinks if left unlatched, siphoning warmth from surrounding walls. Same principle as a drafty wattle gap. It must be sealed. You kneel, fingers instantly numb, and fish a multi-tool from your pocket. Medieval peasants kept awls tucked into belts for midnight roof repairs. This is your 21st century awl. The screw turns grudgingly too. 3 rotations until metal meets metal and the clatter ceases. Silence returns, broad as the dark. That's when you hear a different sound. Not metallic, but organic, a muffled cough from somewhere below. Possibly the new family in 2A? Their lights were out hours ago. You picture a toddler's lungs meeting sub-zero air and know the equation. Cold plus moisture equals pneumonia. In 1347 it claimed a third of one village after a single bitter week. Back inside, the tallow log is probably burning well, heat radiating, spirits lifting. You could rejoin your micro hearth, bank the ember, wait for dawn. The cough comes again wet, bark thin, the kind that strips heat straight from a chest. Your mind flashes to a 15th century manor roll describing knights and villains alike, dropping everything to relight a neighbour's hearth, lest the cold lay claim to 2 souls instead of 1. The code is older than electricity. If a fire dies nearby, your own will not burn steady. You jog back to the apartment, crack the door just wide enough to keep the warm air penned. "Someone downstairs is in trouble," you whisper. Mrs. Delgado's eyes mirror the candlelight, worried but resolute. She unravels a wool throw from the human lasagna stack and folds it double. "Take this, and 1 briquette." She plucks it from the dwindling hoard like a mother hen sacrificing the fattest chick. The grad student fishes a metal water bottle from her pack. "Fill it," she says. Hot water is medieval bed warmer tech. You nod, pour from the simmering Dutch oven, and seal the lid. The cat mews disapproval. Every ounce of heat counts, but history's calculus is clear. Shared calories, shared coals, shared dawn. You step back into the corridor armed with blanket, ember tin and glowing bottle. The stairwell yawns below like a mine shaft. Your flashlight paints steps rhymed in sugar, white frost. Each descent creaks loud enough to wake the building. Yet the cough persists, softer now fatigue or worse. At the 2nd floor landing you smell it. Drywall dust, burst, pipe damp, the cold metal scent that once hovered over flooded moats. Apartment 2A's door is cracked a finger's width. Warm light absent. You rap gently. No answer. Medieval law allowed neighbours to enter if smoke or silence suggested peril. You decide the tradition still holds. Inside, emergency lighting throws long blue shadows across overturned toys. The thermostat blinks. Low bat. A space heater stands silent. Its plug, iced with condensation breaker, must have tripped hours ago. In the bedroom doorway, you see a woman wrapped around a small child, both shivering under a single sheet. Her eyes flicker open, unfocused. "I've got heat," you murmur, raising the ember tin like a relic. Recognition spreads. She loosens her grip enough for you to slip the blanket over them, slide the hot bottle against the child's ribs. Steam curls from the cap, ghostly and reassuring. You glance around for more fuel paperback spines, cardboard castles of diaper boxes, anything that can be rolled, waxed, reborn as fire. Cardboard castles become siege engines against hypothermia when you have nothing else. You kneel by the diaper boxes, slicing them into strips with your multi-tool. The woman Maria, you learn between shiverstries to apologize for the mess. Draft. Blew the window. Couldn't pay the breaker. Her voice is a reed in winter water. You shake your head. Explanation is heat you can't spare. Step 1. Rekindle. The apartment's electric stove is useless, but a dented stainless steel stockpot sits in the sink. You dump the strips inside, add 2 paperback chapters for kindling, then unscrew the ember tin. The single glowing briquette hisses like a dragon egg when it kisses the paper. You shelter the fledgling flame with a cereal box flap, coax it until tongues of orange crawl the cardboard. Smoke swirls up in lazy ribbon snow chimney, just the vent hood, dead as the stove. Fine. Medieval huts let the smoke soak walls to kill insects. Tonight, You'll let it ride the cracked window, a sacrifice to the frost gods. Maria's eyes widen as warmth pulses out. Won't the alarm? Battery died with the heater. You tell her. A grim blessing. No shrill wail to wake the building's light sleepers or the landlord. Step 2. Insulate. You drag a plastic laundry basket next to the makeshift brazier. Line it with every towel you can find, then set the hot water bottle inside like a sacred heart. A modern haybox cooker, you explain. Trap heat now, bleed it slow later. Maria manages a faint, incredulous smile the first thaw. Step 3. Layers. The child's pyjama top is thin polyester, already clammy. You remember section 6 of your mental script. Linen, then wool, then grease. No wool here, but there's a pile of unfolded laundry. You pick a cotton hoodie, slip it over the kid, then smear a fingertip of diaper rash ointment along the zipper line. Oily barrier, medieval logic. Block wind, hold calories. Your flashlight beam sweeps the ceiling. A hairline crack snakes across the drywall like lightning caught mid-strike. Ice expansion? Roof load? Either could drop plaster onto the firepot, smothering it in sparks and gypsum. You reposition the brazier beneath a solid joist and flip a baking sheet over the stockpot as a shield half hearthstone, half fireguard. The flame steadies. Maria's cough softens, replaced by a sigh that fogs the cold air. You hand her a mug of water, lukewarm but not ice, brewed from snowmelt in the Dutch oven upstairs. The stockpot glows dull red, but its heat footprint is a puddle in a frozen sea. You pace the apartment, estimating losses the way a reeve once tallied grain. Every draft is a stolen sheaf. The bedroom window, the culprit hangs crooked in its frame. Glass spider webbed from the night the temperature dove. You press a palm to the sill. Wind needled with sleet hisses through a gap wide as a quill. Medieval peasants wedged moss and manure into seams. You settle for the 21st century equivalent, disposable diapers. Split them, shake out the super-absorbent crystals, and tamp the swelling fluff into the crack. Instant synthetic moss. Maria watches, astonished, as the wind's whistle fades to a mousy squeak. Next problem. Fuel. Cardboard won't last till dawn. You scan the toy-strewn floor and spot a rainbow plastic castle. Hollow walls, thin perfect flues. You ask the child, Lena. Tiny voice now thawed enough to answer if the castle can become a fortress for everyone. She nods, solemn as any 4-year-old signing a land grant. Surrender accepted. You snap turrets free, slice windows to vent, and nestle the pieces atop the burning paper. The plastic slumps, curls, then ignites with a blue kiss. Not ideal fumes threaten, but a cracked kitchen window turns chimney, dragging the poison outside. Smoke for pests, breath for folk. The old bargain stands. Maria drifts towards sleep, eyelids heavy. You resist. Section 8 bangs a skillet in your memory. Someone must watch the ember. You check your watch to 7 a.m. and decide on medieval rota math. 2-hour shifts, overlap by 5 minutes for handoff. You scrawl the plan on a grocery receipt. Tuck it beneath the water bottle where Maria will see it if she stirs. Upstairs, Mrs. Delgado still guards the communal hearth alone. She'll need relief soon, and you've just promised another post. The building has become a scattered manor. Each apartment its own hut, each tenant a link in the fire chain. Break one. The cold marches in formation. A crack echoes overhead dull, wooden, heavy. You freeze, listening. Not thunder. The storm ended hours ago. A joist surrendering to ice? Or merely the building settling under its quilt of snow? The brazier flickers, throwing shadows that dance like worried peasants across the walls. You tighten your coat, stare at the ceiling, and wonder how many more joints can groan before the long night tests them all. The ceiling quiets, but the silence feels loaded like a bowstring drawn back, waiting. You jot a final note for Maria Feed. Fire every 30 min, castle walls first, and slip the multi-tool into your pocket. Time for the upstairs watch. The stairwell is an indoor glacier, every step glassed with ice from burst radiator lines. You grip the rail, imagining medieval peasants tiptoeing barn ladders slick with frost to check the loft animals. Same posture, same stakes. One slip, broken bone, no doctor. Mrs. Delgado's door sits open a hand's width. Warmth should be flowing out. Instead, a cold draught exhales, metallic with smoke. You knock soft. "Guard change," you whisper. No answer. Inside, the apartment is lit by the orange square of an oven set to broil. Door propped with a wooden spoon. Telephone book pages smoulder on the bottom rack, curling like autumn leaves. Mrs. Delgado kneels before them, rosary in one hand, spatula in the other, flipping pages to keep them from sticking an 80-year-old fire tender trapped in section 3 of your mental script. "Señora, tiempo de descansar," you say. Her eyes track you, glazed but grateful. You guide her to the recliner, tuck a quilt around her shoulders, and slide a metal mixing bowl under the oven door to catch Sparks' makeshift Hearthstone medieval standard. Fuel check. 1.5 phone books left, stack of junk mail, and score a cedar coat rack. You break off a dowel. It smells like Christmas before it meets the flame. Heat blooms, quick and eager, licking frost from the window above the sink. A bead of meltwater races the glass, proof that physics still answers prayers. Next, insulation. Draft slithers through the mail slot like a ferret. You kneel, jam a rolled bath towel into the gap, then tape over it with strips torn from a plastic grocery bag synthetic dung plaster. The wind's hiss mutes to a sigh. Mrs. Delgado dozes, rosary still looping her fingers. You set your watch. Shift ends 4. 15 a.m. 2 hours to keep embers alive. You settle cross-legged by the oven, poke the coals, and let your mind drift back to those peasants banking ash, trading stories to stay awake. You have no bard, so you recite section 7 under your breath, listing root-veg stews like a lullaby. A thud shivers the floorboards. Not the polite creak of settling wood, something heavier farther up. You kill the oven light, listen. Above the ceiling, snowpack or footsteps. Another thump, slow, deliberate, pacing the length of the attic. The footsteps, if that's what they are, pause, then resume with a scuffing drag, as though the walker is kicking through drifts no one else can see. You picture the manor-turned tenement from outside. Pitched roof, 30 inches of wet snow, joists groaning like ox carts. Medieval peasants feared this moment too. After every blizzard, the tallest lad climbed a ladder with a pike and jabbed the thatch to shed weight before the whole house folded. No ladders here, no lad, just you and a century-old walk-up. You kill the oven's one glow altogether and thumb on your phone light, screen dimmed. Mrs. Delgado keeps breathing in little puffs evidence of both life and cold. You tighten the quilt around her, then raid the coat closet. 2 X-large parkas, a golf umbrella, and jackpot. A wooden broom long enough to touch the ceiling if you climb the arm of the recliner. You wedge the broom handle up, tap the plaster twice. Silence. A third tap, the overhead footfall answers with a heavier stomp right above you, then edges toward the building's center beam. Weight redistribution or intruder? Either could kill. The peasants solve the ambiguity the same way. Make noise, force a response. You set the broom aside, grab a saucepan, and bang it against the radiator in a syncopated clang any villager would recognize as alarm. Sound ricochets through ducts and stairwells. Lights flick on in distant units. Somewhere a baby starts wailing. The stomp halts. You switch tactics information over intimidation. Pull Maria's walkie-talkie from your coat pocket. Thumb the cracked button. Anyone top floor, attic level, respond. Static swishes like sleet. Roof might be failing, you add, hoping threat of collapse entices a confession. More static, then a voice, male, thin with altitude or fear. Just clearing vents, need heat too. Before you can reply, the channel dies. Clearing vents? Logical. Life-saving Evengers lines could choke on ice. But why the skulking steps? Why now? You study the ceiling's hairline cracks. Plaster dust drifts, sparkling in your phone beam. One more load of snow, and the lath might give way, spilling attic, stranger, and winter itself into the room. You pocket the phone, sling both parkas over your shoulder, and climb onto the kitchen table for a better angle. Whether the threat is man or physics, you'll have to go up their medieval ladder or not. The broom's bristles graze the access panel. It quivers, as if something on the other side is already reaching down.